You are a Jedi, right?
I never actually said that.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Skeleton Crew Episode 3. Episode 3 is entitled Very Interesting as an Astrogration Problem. For those who are curious, astrogation refers to the science or art of navigating a spaceship. In this episode, a very mysterious stranger offers to help our heroes. Now, before we get into this episode, Patrick, I do need to acknowledge some of the feedback that we've gotten from last week's episode. It seems as though people are finally tired of my bullshit. Is kind of what
this is it. Like,
this is the thing.
We hit the mark.
This is the thing. We had two decodingtv.com subscribers, both named Isaac, put me on blast this week. Isaac B writes, I gotta disagree that Skeleton Crew is stretching the Star Wars IP. For me, it's attempting to expand it in a way that's long overdue. Outside of maybe something like Andor, for 50 years, Star Wars has felt extremely limited in scope for a franchise set in a massive galaxy. Almost every story alternates between a desert, jungle, snow planet, focusing on bounty hunters, Jedi, and/or Sith, with the occasional Skywalker popping in to tie everything up back to the original trilogy. Glad to see new corners of the galaxy through the eyes of characters who feel detached from those mainline elements. It's very exciting. The most disappointing thing about the show is the wasted potential of directors like David Lowery. While not poorly directed, nothing about these episodes feel like they were directed by auteurs breaking out of the box of the usual Disney Star Wars aesthetic, end quote. Gotta agree with that last point. But Isaac wrote in saying, hey, this is a great expansion of the series. By the way, a lot of people also commented on my comments about how like the pistols in Star Wars were the same. You know, someone on YouTube said like, dude, they were using literal like AK-47s in Andor. You know, like, and that's true. They're using more conventional weapons in Andor. There's no such thing as a gun that exists in the Star Wars universe, as far as I can tell, like a regular Earth gun that exists in Star Wars universe. But anyway, the Andor weapons looked very much like some of the weapons. They look like Earth weapons, basically, in Andor. And so people were like, how dare you have a double standard for that? And that's fine. I accept that criticism. Isaac S. writes, David, can't we just enjoy ourselves for once? I like that you're enjoying this, Patrick. Skeleton Crew is a genuinely entertaining show, and there's no need to overanalyze every aspect of a fictional sci-fi universe.
Okay,
Using a suburban environment at the start was a brilliant choice. It gave us a glimpse of ordinary life and allowed us to connect with the main characters before they embark on their adventure. It's refreshing compared to so many recent Star Wars stories, like The Acolyte or Ahsoka, that immediately drop us into isolated, barren planets. I watched these first two episodes with my family, and when they ended, everyone was eager to start the next one. Unfortunately, I had to break it to them that new episodes come out weekly. So now we're all looking forward to what's next. This show represents Star Wars universe at its finest, a fantastical setting full of aliens, droids, spaceships, and a sprinkling of magic. And yes, some good old-fashioned space pirates, end quote. Now, I don't know if I would go so far as to say this show represents Star Wars at its finest.
I cannot believe people are making me defend David Chen. What do you like? You like these? We articulated our points about the suburban setting just fine, and I liked the show quite a bit.
It's fascinating too. Like on the Filmcast, my co-host Jeff Kanata, he disliked the show way more than me. I don't know if you heard that episode, but he's like,
I have not yet.
He really did not appreciate
because of that.
Because basically his position is if anything can be Star Wars, then Star Wars has no meaning anymore.
Right? And Jeff is, I know Jeff is older than me. Jeff is also older than you, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And so I think part of what's influencing that is Jeff was also older when experiencing things like the Goonies. And so I think part of your proximity to like when you experience like the elements that it's so directly pulling from, I can fully understand like him having a more like stronger visceral reaction to that that I think is in the same proximity of criticism that you and I had, but his just burns a little brighter because he was a little older when he experienced those original inspirations.
Yeah, indeed. But here's the thing, Patrick Klepek. So first of all, understand people are tired of my complaints. And, you know, if you're a paid Decoding TV subscriber, you can say anything to me and I'll read it on the air, basically. But I'm pleased to report that because of / in spite of people's comments, I really quite enjoyed episode 3 of Skeleton Crew. This is, in my opinion, a far more enjoyable show right now than it was in episodes 1 and 2. And there are two words that explain that. it's Jude Law, right? Like seeing Jude Law bounce off of these child actors, metaphorically, is way more entertaining, in my opinion, than just watching the child actors. Like, this is a dynamic that I've seen in many movies. I enjoy it, where it's like, this guy is trying to kind of like trick these kids, but also the kids are a little smarter than he thinks they are. Like, it's just an interesting, fun dynamic. Like, it's just a great dynamic that the show has now. And so I am like way more on board this week with episode 3 than I was for the first 2 episodes. Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on episode 3?
One, well, I broadly loved it, adored it, like had a great time with it. One, I think people forget David Lowery is not just the Green Knight. David Lowery also directed and wrote a Peter Pan adaptation that pretty much nobody watched, like semi-recently, that I think was a Disney Plus exclusive, pretty sure. Also did an adaptation or an interpretation of Pete the Dragon that was really good and really interesting. This is
Pete's Dragon.
Pete's Dragon. This is a filmmaker that is not afraid and likes to play in the sandbox of existing IP. And sometimes, like in Pete's Dragon, does something pretty extraordinary with it. And sometimes with Peter Pan, doesn't do very much with it. Just sort of makes a pretty rote Peter Pan story that looks really pretty because Lowery is sort of incapable of making something that doesn't look gorgeous. And I think Skeleton Crew kind of falls into that bucket of like, he doesn't mind working in existing worlds, and putting some version of a stamp on it is not always the most precious thing to him. It's like, he just likes these worlds and these characters. And like, I think as beaten up as Star Wars is over the years, that remains still an attractive element for at least now, like being in a Star Wars, making a Star Wars is still appealing to a lot of filmmakers of a certain generation. Two, if you're looking for optimism on this show, and I really, I enjoyed the first 2 episodes and loved the 3rd episode. There is a bit of a Stranger Things sort of element here, which Stranger Things gets you in the door on a lot of the same elements. It's suburbia. It's the 80s. It's synthesizer music. Like, it's leaning more into the horror, but is the same era of filmmaking and influences. It's all pulling from E.T. era Spielberg. Like, that's what Amblin Entertainment, like what they were doing in the 80s, like this is what all this stuff pulls from. And Stranger Things uses that to get you in the door, and then, at least in my opinion, like keeps you there with its own compelling characters, story, world. The influences build out the aesthetic and a lot of the vibe, but the reason you stick around, the reason it's a phenomenon, is because of what it did with those influences and then found its own identity. I think what Skeleton Crew does in its 3rd episode is those influences like so in your face in those first 2 episodes, the first episode especially. And by this 3rd episode, I feel like I'm watching a show with its own identity, and it wears its influences on its sleeve. It uses that to prop itself up and get it to where it is, but it's standing on that cardboard box of Amblin, like filmmaking. And now it's speaking in its own voice, and it's in conversation with that stuff, but does not feel like it is constantly looking at the screen, pointing and going, I know what you're referencing there. Like, I understand that. And I think that goes a long way to, like, in like the most broadest sense, explaining why this episode works as well as it does.
Interesting. First of all, a very eloquent defense of David Lowery's work on this franchise. I was going to say something much simpler and say David Lowery likes making things where people interact with CG things. and that would explain his work on this episode specifically, right? Where they interact with this creature called Kim, who's basically like an owl type.
Oh,
right?
One of my favorite. We talked about the droids. Like, man, Star Wars just, even in bad shows, can't miss with like really fun droids. Not always the case with like new species creatures, but like, man, this is one of my favorites in a long time.
The design is super cool. It's very much like it reminds me of like Maz Kanata from the others. It's like kind of a little little creature,
just a little guy.
Coded as female, I think, that like is guiding the protagonist through the situation that they're in. Anyway, I thought the design and execution of Kim was overall like very cool, and I'm like, oh, maybe this is why David Lowery took this project on, because like, David Lowery, if you direct this episode, you get to film Jude Law trying to kill this owl thing, and that's something that might appeal to you. Anyway, okay. Few things that happened during this episode. Gotta be honest, like not much happens in the show, and I don't say that as like a fault. I'm just saying like there's not like a lot of intricate plot to unravel.
Which is I gotta be honest, like that's a good show can be a hang with the crew, and I feel like that's a hallmark of you want plot motivation to push things around, but the requirements of plot change from show to show, and this the vibe they're going for, like the Goonies isn't good because of the mystery is incredible. It's fine. It's because of the cast of characters and what's the situation they get into next. And the thing, what you're crossing your fingers on in this show is we did it. We had the dynamic. Now we have 5 more episodes to watch them get into hijinks.
Yeah. So in the very first scene, the parents of all the children are gathered together and they're really worried about what's going on. And, Carrie Condon is saying things like, the safety droids will find them eventually. Don't worry about it. The safety droids, which is weird to have a society that has safety droids, not sure I'd want to live in that. But anyway, they understand that their kids are in a terrible predicament. Meanwhile, back on the pirate station, Jude Law introduces himself as a Jedi called Ja Na Na Wood, which I thought was a cool name. A cool name considering his actual name appears to be someone called Crimson Jack, which by the way is also another cool name. So I have to say he's got a couple of cool names.
Comes from the comics, apparently, where that falls in how Disney treats, the old lore, pre Force Awakens, but apparently has a place in Star Wars history.
They make it back to the ship, and by the way, I like how they use the kids as exposition machines, where the kids aren't as skeptical as us. They're saying, "Hey, if you could escape this whole time, why didn't you escape?"
It's great. That's hard to do without feeling cringe, and I think they're perfect vehicles because what do you ask? This is what we were asking at the end of our discussion before. It's what I was deeply suspicious of the use of the Force to drag that key over. It's something's up. Something's a little weird with this guy. And so the kids arriving at that, be if you're a Jedi, go get our droid. It's just so good.
Yeah,
and I think he still might be Force sensitive.
Yes, I think it's very possible he's Force sensitive. Otherwise, I think that was like a ruse, how he got the keys, right?
I think he is an untrained, Force sensitive. So not a Jedi, but Force sensitive, and that explains I can weakly get a key to come over, but I can't do much else.
And is it possible that as a scoundrel, Patrick Klepek, he's going to learn some really important lessons about nobility and truth and honor and integrity, perhaps from the Jedi way of life by the end of the franchise or by the end of the series?
I hope it's not that straightforward, but it probably is. It probably is.
As I was saying those words, Patrick, the disappointment on Patrick's face kind of sank in.
I mean, that would be very Spielbergian. So
yeah, it's probably what's gonna happen. Anyway, so they make it back to the ship and they go. The kids challenge him to go get their droid back, which he does. By the way, some people pointed out that SM-33 is, if you look at it weirdly, it spells Smee, which is a homage to the Captain Hook's, first dude. Anyway, so they get Smee back. We'll just call him Smee. They get Smee back onto the ship. And there's a very cool scene where the ship takes off to hyperspace while attached to a fuel line.
Yeah.
And the kids are like, wait, isn't it dangerous to do that? And it's oh, wow. We're about to watch something I don't think we've seen before.
No.
I don't think we've seen a ship take off into hyperspace while attached to a fuel line, which is very exciting. Now, probably that would just rip the thing right off the ship and cause some damage to the ship. Fortunately, it doesn't in this case. But you do see that the fuel line snaps backward at incredibly high rate of speed, damaging tons of ships and people along the way, which I thought was very, very cool. So, yeah. Anyway, they arrive at Ja Na Na Woods, a.k.a. Crimson Jack's friend's planet, and her name is Kim. Kim is the one who calls him Crimson Jack.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, the show kind of implies that the two of them had a relationship. Did you get that sense?
Certainly a history.
Certainly a history. And I'm like, did Jude Law have sex with the owl thing? That was my That was my question.
Look,
You know?
Someone earlier, a listener of Decoding TV said, I'm so excited that we're charting new ground that comes
Absolutely.
in many different forms. I don't know how this works. Maybe they put on little virtual reality headsets, and I just, who could say? Who could say?
Anyway, the owl woman, Kim, she kind of helps them to uncover what's going on with their planet. It's cool. She has this whole database of all the planets in the galaxy, basically, and she's kind of inputting descriptors into it to try to narrow it down as to how to find at Aden, which is the planet that they're from, and it's not available on any map. According to Kim, at Aden is one of the jewels of the old republic, planets of wonders kept hidden for their protection. Apparently, all the other jewels of the republic were destroyed, is what I understand. And so at Aden is the only one that remains. There's also a fun bit where the kids don't know about like what happened at Alderaan.
In school we learn about Coruscant and Alderaan.
Alderaan? Missed the war, did you?
What war?
Which was obviously destroyed in I think episode 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh well, you guys haven't been keeping up with what's going on in history. So anyway,
or haven't been allowed to, right? I think that's a lot of where we're headed towards is some sort of reveal. It's the same with like why is one of the moms so like the safety droids will, you know what I mean? It just feels like, well, you live long enough in a world where you can't ask questions. You just accept reality. How do you wake up the next day? You accept the reality in front of you and put one foot in front of the other.
Indeed. All right. And that's basically it. Like there's a fight that ensues. Crimson Jack takes the coordinates that they're able to get, rush to the ship, but the kids try to force him to confess the truth. And he says, okay, I'm not really a Jedi. I'm Crimson Jack. Yeah, they make a deal that'll get him home. He's like, hey, you guys stick with me and I will get you home. Those other guys in the X-Wings, they're not going to get you home. There is a cool chase sequence that's actually kind of fun because each of the kids is doing a different role. It's very similar to the Star Wars ride, Smuggler's Run at Disneyland, where like you go in with like a bunch of people and everyone has a different role on the ship to like get out of it. So this thing is designed to be a video game / ride. And they get away. And that's basically what happens in the episode. Patrick Klepek, any other thoughts on this episode of Skeleton Crew?
No, I was really excited this episode was as good as it was. I was sort of expecting where we were going to be headed with the rest of the show was, I don't know, similar to, I think, how you and I have responded individually to a lot of these shows, which is like, I'm finding a little more fun and aren't holding the faults against it nearly as much. And you find that harder to accept. And I was like, very excited to get to the end. I was like, it was just a good episode. Like David's going to be happy too. Like that makes me happy. And it's just a really good, fun episode of television. Who do we know who directs? Are the Daniels up next? Do you know who is on tap?
So, yeah. David Lowery did this one. Yeah.
I think it should be instructive from these two episodes that maybe as exciting as it is for some of the filmmakers that got lined up, that not necessarily, if you didn't know who directed it, you might not know any difference.
Right.
But what I hope for is that this material was interesting enough to get these creatives to want to come play in this universe, this particular sandbox. And I'm excited to see. We don't know what the setup is for like the next. What are they going to get? What's the episodic structure next week? What's the thing that the problem they got to solve? And we now have some established dynamics for all the characters that they have fun individual roles and personalities. And that's now what I'm excited to see play out in the episodes to come.
The kids in this series have a very theatrical performance style. And what I mean by that is it's like very, the intensity is very high. If it often feels like they are on a stage in a musical, as opposed to on a TV show. And that is a really hard dynamic to like anchor a show for me. Just for me, David Chen personally. Like it's just like not my personal preferred style. But set that up against Jude Law trying to deceive them, and it's like, oh wow, that is a much more palatable style of like, oh, like it's fine to have the kids, in my opinion, should be like the spice in the stew, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh, you have Jude Law anchoring this thing, and then you have these kids like spicing it up a little bit. They cannot be the stew, in my opinion. And that's what I had a problem with in the first 2 episodes, is like they were the stew. And I didn't find it to be a very satisfying stew, sadly.
That might be the problem that's facing them next week. What if the children are just literally going to become stew, David? How will they get out of this one?
Indeed.
Can he
Indeed.
use his
All
force powers to move the... There's going to be some point, right, with him where he has to try and use the force and is not... I bet he'll be able to use it, but it's going to be a different version than like that really cringy moment in Ahsoka where she does like the double jump to like get across and it feels very unearned. Like, I feel like there's a chance where like this is really satisfying. Like, come on, man, make the button push. Just make the button push. And he's able to pull it off.
Indeed. Well, I am now, on board with the show.
You're on board with the crew. You
I'm
joined
on board
the
with the
skeleton crew.
I'm psyched. We'll see whether or not I'm off board with the crew next week. But for now, I'm on board. I thought this was a great episode. I really enjoyed it, and looking forward to discussing more. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.